Good afternoon, Keith Tebow from FRC Media. Thank you for joining us today. There are two ballot questions on the Massachusetts state ballot as voters go to the polls on November 3rd. Today, we're going to focus on ballot question number 2, which is ranked choice voting. What ranked choice voting would do, if passed, is it would allow for voters when they go to the polls to vote for one candidate if they wish to, but also have the opportunity, if there are more than two candidates in any race, to sort of rank them one through how many candidates there are in order to give an opportunity for a candidate to get up to 50% of the vote in any races that feature more than two candidates. Many times, if there's candidates of three or more, there are many times that a candidate will not get 50% of the vote. If a candidate were to get 50% of the vote under ranked choice voting, then the election would be over. If not, what would happen is the lower ranked candidate, whoever would finish last, let's say in a 4-person race, that person's votes would not get eliminated, but people who voted for that candidate under ranked choice voting, they would take into consideration their second choice. And those would be added to those of the other candidates until a candidate received 50% of the vote. I know that may seem confusing, and hopefully it's not, but we're going to be talking a little bit about this this afternoon. I'm pleased to be joined by Anthony Amore. He is here on behalf of people who are asking voters to vote no on question 2. Anthony, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
I'm well, Keith. How are you? Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So first of all, what are your thoughts on ranked choice voting, and why should people just vote no on this?
Well, I'm firmly against ranked choice voting. I think I enjoyed listening to you explain what ranked choice voting is, and I like the way you said at the end that may be confusing for some of you, and indeed it is. It's confusing for almost everyone who tries to figure out what it is. It takes some explanation. The proponents of it use videos and all sorts of other neat little ways to explain what it is, but hopefully your viewers will understand that when you have to get that deep into a voting system where your entire life you've just gone in and voted for the person you wanted, and now you need to be trained essentially on this complicated system, you see the problems that it can create.
One of the things that I found interesting by the proponents of the program are saying that, in many cases, and one of the examples brought up was the recent Democratic primary for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District, where the winner of that primary, Jake Auchincloss, didn't even receive 25% of the vote, and he was able to move on. And the argument that the proponents are making is, in a race like this, the way the system would work, whoever would win that race would end up getting a majority of the vote. Is it the way we vote now, Anthony? Is it sort of unfair that a candidate may win an election without even getting 50% of the vote?
Well, let me address the way that was explained to you by the proponents. No, the person who ultimately would have won under ranked choice voting wouldn't have gotten the most votes. They would have gotten the most second place votes, or possibly even third place votes. I refer to ranked choice voting as a system to use when you care enough to elect the second best. It isn't a system which gives you a winner based on people who chose that person first. So I like the 4th Congressional District as an example, arguing against ranked choice voting, because when you think about that campaign, there were 7 Democrats running, each one with a very narrow difference between each other, one that I personally cannot articulate. And then to think someone would go into the voting booth and know what those very slight differences are to vote for 2 of the people or 5 of the people or 7 or just one is, I think that's asking too much of the voter. And I don't think most people have that amount of knowledge when they go into the voting booth. On top of that, let me just say, it's a confusing system as well. And it has been proven in other places where it's been tried to often disenfranchise voters, especially people who are traditionally disenfranchised. So, for instance, in Oakland, they found that people who are traditionally disenfranchised from the voting system are up to 9 times more likely to cast a vote that was considered spoiled and discounted than their peers who are perhaps from wealthier areas in Oakland. So it's an unfair system. It's a complicated system. It doesn't serve anybody well.
It was also important to note, and I did note this in speaking with the proponents, is that there's only one state that currently has a statewide system that would be similar to what is looking to be proposed here in Massachusetts, and that's the state of Maine. And they've only done that, I believe, relatively recently.
Yes.
Are there any anecdotes that you can share from maybe their experiences that would help bolster your thoughts on why people should vote no, on just the experiences that Maine has had?
Well, first, I will talk about Maine. In Maine in 2018, Bruce Poliquin, the incumbent congressman, finished with the most votes. But because he didn't have 50%, the ranked choice system kicked in, which was very long to do to get a result. It took quite some time. A recount would have been really onerous. And he ultimately wound up losing because enough people voted for his opponent as their second favorite candidate to win. As you explained, suppose there were 7 candidates. That 7th would have been knocked out, and the people who voted for that 7th, their second favorite person would have gotten their remaining votes. And think about that. So if you go to the voting booth and you choose the person that no one else wants, your second favorite person could win based on your votes, which is really an odd system. Another state I would talk about, and I hope that your viewers listen to this very carefully, is California, in that Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom are both vehemently opposed to ranked choice voting. These are two ultra liberals. This is not a partisan issue. This is not Republicans versus Democrats. You can't be more of a Democrat than Jerry Brown and Gavin Newsom, yet they are strictly opposed to it as well.
Well, that was going to be sort of my next question to you. Is it appears that many Democrats, excuse me, are in support of this, but isn't there an argument to be made that it would be a nonpartisan issue, and that there may be a Republican who may benefit from this in a race, a 3-person race, let's say, for governor, where there is a third-party candidate that may take votes away from one candidate or another?
You're absolutely right. I mean, it does allow for the system to be fixed. There's no question about that. But I would say it is clearly not a partisan issue. I would be opposed to ranked choice voting even if Massachusetts was a heavily red state. I mean, it's all about the one person, one vote doctrine. And then there's, on top of this, is a constitutional issue, in that the Massachusetts state constitution says that the person who wins an election is the person who gets the most votes, not a majority of the votes. So the idea that someone needs to have 51% of the votes is something I don't necessarily agree with. I would add one other point to that, and voters should think, nationwide, voter turnout is notoriously bad. In any election, if a person wins 95-5, they're still not getting 50% of the registered voters' votes. They're getting over 50%, hypothetically, of the people who turned out to vote. So I personally believe that when people don't show up to vote, they're letting themselves be heard too. They're just that disinterested in the people who are running in the election process to bother to vote. So there's a lot of arguments to be made against this idea that someone needs to have 50+1 to be a legitimate winner in an election.
In a state like Massachusetts, when we have, and I can just speak for the city of Fall River, where we're speaking to the voters of Fall River, there are 3 state representatives and 1 state senator that represents Fall River. There are a number of county races. Many of those races this year in 2020, candidates are running unopposed. So if there were a ranked choice voting, would that be attractive for maybe more people to throw their hat into the race, knowing that, yes, I may be sort of an underdog against an incumbent, but if I can get my message out and there's 3 of us, things may change in a certain way? I guess, is there an argument to be made that potentially this could attract more candidates to run for state and regional campaigns?
If it did, I think it would be wrongheaded to think that you have some sort of advantage in a multi-person race under ranked choice voting. I think that you could make the flip argument that the best chance would be in a traditional voting sense, where there were 3 candidates and you split the vote, and you would only need to have, you could win with 34% of the vote. I don't believe that there's enough of an advantage to it to think that more people will get engaged. I think you could counterweight that also with the fact that it can be rigged in that sense. You could, if there's ranked choice voting and you know that you're not very, very popular to get the 50%, but your party is that popular, if you could put up a third candidate who is likely to vote for you second, then you could rig the system in that sense too. So there's pros and cons in those situations, but the idea that you're taking away the idea of one person, one vote seems harmful to me. And you're also encouraging people to go into the voting booth and vote against somebody. So you could go in a 7-person race, vote for one person, and then vote against his opponent 6 times in essence, or 5 times. So I would say that there are a lot of disadvantages to it, but ultimately, even just through our conversation, I'll bet that your viewers are finding this a really complicated system that they might not understand when they go into the voting booth. On top of this, you have to take into account the fact that there are people who don't speak English as their first language, and they'll be going into a voting booth trying to discern this new complicated system that's very difficult for native English speakers to understand, and then to come in with English as your second or third language and try to understand these instructions seems to be very problematic.
You know, there are some proponents who have made the argument, and I mentioned it earlier in our conversation, that, you know, someone can get elected without 50% of the vote. In a number of states, I know some down south, if a race, be it a primary or even a general election, if there are multiple candidates on the ballot, more than 2, and a candidate does not get 50% of the vote, they have another election, they have a runoff. Is that something that would be maybe more appealing to yourself and others that are asking people to vote no, that, you know, if there's a question about someone getting a majority of the vote, that a runoff may be the way to go?
Absolutely. That's what they do in the city of Boston. You take the 2 top vote getters, if there's not a 50% plus winner, and they have a head-to-head. Again, one person, one vote. And in the traditional runoff, there's no reason at all to have this automatic runoff with this really complicated system in which when you vote, you're not even sure what your down ballot votes, how they will work out ultimately. And if you don't vote for all 7, say in a 7-person race, or 5 in a 5-person race, and you vote for 3, but the person who, the top 2 vote getters are people you didn't cast votes for, did you really even vote in that election? It's just a complicated type of thing, and I'll tell you, it works really well as a mathematical equation. I mean, you can see this very complicated mathematical equation to explain it, but is that the sort of thing we want deciding our elections, or do we want people going in and casting their lot behind one person and going from there?
Yeah. I guess that's probably one of the reasons that thus far there haven't been, I don't know if there have been any other states that have actually tried this other than Maine and Massachusetts, but it, you know, in terms of confusion, people would really need to be educated. And, you know, if this were to take effect, it would not take effect until the next state election, which would be in 2022. And it would not necessarily impact local elections, be it for your town selectmen or city councils or mayors. Those individual cities would need to implement their own version of ranked choice voting for that to take place. So just to be aware, that would only take effect, if it were to pass, for state candidates, congressional candidates, and some county-wide candidates. So any other items you want to add, Anthony, in terms of telling people why they should continue to vote no?
I absolutely appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak our side's case. I think that most people understand that even getting people into the ballot booth is a chore, and getting people educated on who the candidates are is a really tough effort. People spend millions of dollars in elections to get their name out there, and yet when you look at polling just before the election, you see that 20% of the people never heard of that candidate. To think that we should pile on a whole bunch of other candidates into a race and then say, please rank these people, many of whom we've never heard of, I think it's an unnecessary complication of our system that doesn't have any great benefit to the electorate.
All right, Anthony Amore, asking voters to vote no on question 2, ranked choice voting. Thank you for joining me, Anthony, and all the best. We'll talk soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for joining us here at FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great day.